Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Monica talking at you from the State Board, and this is our fourth and final installment of the Accessible Math webinar series that Don Draus and I collaborated together to put on for our system. I'm so happy to be joined by you all and just thrilled by the success of this program. So thank you for your continued engagement. A few housekeeping items before we hand it over to our guest presenter, David Lippman, which probably many of you already know. We are recording today's session. Zoom's auto captions are on. The chat is open and also the Q&A feature is open. So Dawn and I will moderate the chat together. And if you're having technical issues or whatnot, we'll do our best to help you. We do ask that as much as possible, if you can remember to put your questions for David about his content, his presentation inside the Q&A feature, that is nice because it helps us track the questions without getting lost in chat. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll have some designated time for discussion and Q&A. Um, After today's session, you will receive a link to a web page that has the recordings and slide decks for all four sessions of this four-part webinar series. So if you weren't able to join one, two, or three, and you're just joining now, that's fine. You're still going to get access to the sessions that came before today. So I think that's it. Without further ado, I want to welcome David. Thank you, David, for agreeing to come talk to us. We
Sure.
are thrilled to hear from you and talk more about WAMAP's accessibility and math accessibility with you. Take it away.
Okay, let me get myself sharing here. Is that working okay?
Yes, you are on screen share, and I'm sorry, I have to say one more thing because
Yeah.
I'm seeing an ask for help in the chat. So for those of you who don't know how to find Q&A, if that's new for you, look at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you have all your little menu options. If you don't immediately see a button labeled Q&A, then what you're going to want to do is click on the button that is labeled with the word more. It's a circle with a three-dot ellipses inside it. Once you select that button, there's a kind of like a dialog box that opens up with lots of options there. Within the list of options, you should see Q&A. If you click select that, it will open up another dialog box for you where you can put your questions in. I hope that helps folks who need that.
Okay. Um, just a warning, there's a chance we've been having some weird weather here. There's a chance I might get cut off, but hopefully not. Um, all right, so this is a update on WAMAP / My Open Math accessibility as of this fall. Um, Sort of the approach I'm going to take is first we're going to talk about sort of the accessibility of the platform and the status of that. We're going to talk about accessibility features in WAMAP and some of the options available. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to check accessibility in your own courses and how to ensure accessibility in question writing. So starting off, platform status. WAMAP has met the guidelines. You've probably heard of WCAG at this point. We've met the guidelines on the student side for many years now. I did a bunch of work this summer, and we now meet the guidelines on the instructor side as well. It's worth noting, though, that this applies only to the platform, not question content or course content added by the users, because, of course, we have no control over that. We do have a VPAT if your college wants a copy. There's also an accessibility link on the login page that contains the same information along with recommendations about accessibility settings. All right, so talking about accessibility settings, in order to get sort of the top level of accessibility, some of the features have to be enabled by the students as they make changes larger than can be handled by normal accessibility means. What I mean by that is you've probably heard of things like alt text on images. Alt text is very limited on what you're allowed to include in alt text. It has to be fairly short, and in some cases we need to include more. And so we have to have someone explicitly enable the display of that sort of more detailed accessible alternative. This is relatively easy for students who are logging directly into WAMAP. The student can click that little gear icon next to their name and scroll down to accessibility and display preferences. If you're using Canvas integration, after opening up an assignment, the student will click the three-dot More menu in the upper right and select User Preferences, and they'll get to the same place. Those settings look like this. These are the accessibility and display preferences, and as you can see, there's several of them, and we're going to go through them. So here we go. The first one is Math Display Options. So the default display in WAMAP is MathJax 3. Um, it works pretty good for accessibility, but might require activating the accessibility options by right-clicking on the math or activating it with the keyboard and then turning it on. That only needs to be done once per device. But if it is somebody using a screen reader, the recommendation is that they use MathJax 4, which is one of the options in those settings, as it has the accessibility features enabled by default. The cool thing about MathJax is it auto-generates the text-to-speech for math expressions, as well as having some interesting features for letting the student like drill into the math expression and explore it. It's got click-to-zoom capabilities for low vision. It's got Braille capabilities, lots of cool features. But the basic one, again, is that text-to-speech. And here's an example of that. So you got like a rendered math expression there. And if you look at what it's generating f of x equals x to the sixth power times blah, 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 a very reasonable sort of representation of or reading of that math expression. And that takes care of math accessibility, basically, at least the reading of math through a screen reader. All right, for graphs, students using a screen reader on that, again, there's those display options. They should select the option for text alternatives. Most of the built-in graph generating functions in WAMAP, like show plot, histogram, things like that, can auto-generate a textual alternative. Now, oftentimes this is a table of values, which admittedly may or may not be useful, so this may not be sufficient for all questions. So if you are a question writer, you may need to do some work if this is not a sufficient alternative, but at least it provides a general automated alternative in most cases. Do note that this does nothing for static images, things like PNG files, GIF files, JPEG files. Those still need alt text. So let me show you what this does. Here's an example. On the left is sort of your standard display where the question asking for the slope of a line and it shows a graph of a line. On the right here, you see the auto-generated text alternative where it generates a table of values for the function instead. Certainly in this case, this would be perfectly sufficient, right? You can use some points to calculate the slope of a line. But again, there might be certain cases where this would not be sufficient. Next option is for drawing entry. As you know, there's some questions in WAMAP where it asks students to draw a question by like clicking on 2 points to draw a line. So students who are using a screen reader or who are unable to use a mouse should select the keyboard and text-based drawing alternative entry. And this will automatically convert any drawing question from one that asks them to draw with a mouse into one that asks them to enter points on the keyboard instead. Note that this does not impact questions using other interactive things like JSXGraph or GeoGebra. It only works for the built-in drawing question type. So here's an example of that. On the left is the standard question, sketch a graph of, and the student would click on those 2 points, right, drawing the line. On the right, you see the text alternative, where they would first say, I want to add a new line to my graph, and then they would enter 2 points on the line as 2 ordered pairs. And again, depending upon the question type, it'll change. So like if they needed to draw a parabola, they would say, I need to add a parabola. And it would say, enter the coordinates of the vertex and another point on the graph, right? Same as that they would do using a mouse on a graph, just they're doing it using a keyboard and text instead. Next options. The Text editor option can be changed to plain text entry if the rich text editor is distracting. The rich text editor is the one with all the buttons for bold and italics and things like that. Um, while that text editor is accessible, it might be overwhelming to some users, so they can turn that off and just get a plain text area instead. Uh, next one is math entry. And this can be changed to calculator style text entry if the equation editor is difficult to use. And this is recommended option for screen readers as the equation editor does not work particularly well with screen readers. The equation editor can be used via keyboard alone, but note that the equation editor buttons are not keyboard accessible. So if using a keyboard alone, you have to use just keyboard typing commands to enter things. So here's an example of that. Here's your standard equation editor entry where you can enter all of that using a keyboard, or you can, if you're using a mouse, you can press the buttons to get like exponents and things like that. If somebody was using the equation editor and not a mouse, then they would need to use the keyboard for things like to create an exponent, they would use the caret key. So everything can be done using the keyboard alone. The editor buttons aren't necessary. And again, they are not accessible. For someone using a screen reader, though, again, the recommendation is to enable the calculator style entry, which will switch it to this that you see in the bottom right here, where they enter it in like you would on a calculator, like on a TID, whatever calculator. And it will automatically, once they've typed in their expression, it will generate a rendered preview for someone who's visual, and it will also read that expression to them using again the math jacks so that they can make sure that it's being interpreted the way that they intended. Okay, so that is usually the recommendation for screen reader users or people who just don't like this thing. Couple other options. Last couple options. One is course styling. If a student needs particularly high contrast, there's a high contrast option. And while not relevant most of the time, when using that calculator style entry, if that auto preview of their entered text is distracting, that can be disabled. And that hits all of the accessibility settings that are available. Again, the idea is that based on a student's specific needs, then they can customize sort of the way that they interact with WAMAP to meet their needs as best as possible. Okay, next we get to dive into our individual courses and looking at the content in our courses. Because again, the accessibility in the platform does not ensure the accessibility of the content within your course. So the things that we need to check and consider when we're thinking about accessibility of our courses are any outside textbook materials that you've either uploaded or linked to, any text that you have entered or typed into WAMAP, such as text items, assessment intros, between question text, things like that. Videos that you've embedded or linked to, and the questions that you use in your assessments. If you've gone to any accessibility talks, you've probably heard most of this before, but I'm going to go do it again. This is the super basics of accessibility and content, sort of the really, really sort of base level things that you need to worry about. Number one, static images, like again, PNG files, JPEG files, GIF files, things like that. They need alt text or alternate text that is sufficient to convey the equivalent information. Videos have to be captioned, and the accessibility standards say that auto captions like YouTube auto captions are not considered sufficient, so they do need to be manually edited captions. You shouldn't use color alone for indicating meaning or distinguishing items. This is important for things like matching questions. You don't want to say match each graph with its color and not have any other way to distinguish between items. You have to have sufficient contrast between background and text. Everything should be usable with the keyboard alone. Links should have meaningful labels, not just link or click here. And headers should follow correct order and nesting. So we'll dig into a few of these now. First off, outside text materials. Um, if you use PDFs, don't. PDFs are just generally crap for accessibility. Um, HTML online stuff is generally going to be your best alternative. Word sometimes will work. Um, but again, HTML is usually the easiest option. I will mention, I can't remember if I have this somewhere else in my slides, but if you are using almost any open book, most of them have been reproduced on LibreTexts, and um, that's an online platform that has that you can link students to as well. You don't have to give up PDFs. You can't not link to PDFs. Just also have a link to the web version for students who need it. I will mention that not everything on LibreTexts is 100% accessible, but a lot of it is. Almost all the OpenStax stuff is. Um, my pre-calc books are my Math and Society. Most chapters are. There's a couple I didn't get to yet. Um, so a lot of them are pretty good. Okay, getting back to this though, when you're looking at your content, check that images have alt text and that it's useful alt text. You may be familiar with browser extensions like Accessibility Insights for Web or Wave or some of these other ones. Those can do a basic scan for existence of alt text, but can't tell you if it's useful alt text. So you really should look at it and make sure that it's actually useful alt text. You can usually right click on an image and pick inspect in your browser to take a look. And check that math is being rendered using MathJax or something similar, which will generally take care of accessibility there. Let me show you an example on the alt text thing. Here are images from two different books. On the left, when I looked at the alt text, you can see it reads, this figure is two vectors with the same initial point, blah, 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 blah. That's a perfectly decent alt text. It provides enough information for the reader to know what they need to know about the image. The one on the right here, the alt text says graphs. That's completely useless, right? If a student using screen reader was to get here, all they would hear is graphs, and they would know nothing else about what is being shown here. That's obviously not going to be useful to them. So this would be considered insufficient and not meet accessibility needs. So do be on the lookout for that sort of thing. All right. Uh, Getting back to checking content. So we talked about outside content. Now let's talk about content in WAMAP. Um, I added a tool this summer to help a bit with this. In the left navigation in WAMAP under the Tools menu, if you pick More and then Reports and select Accessibility Reports, that will do a very cursory scan of your course for the most blatant issues. Specifically, it will look for missing alt text on images and uncaptioned YouTube videos. Note that it does not check other things. It does not check color, contrast, videos in non-YouTube platforms, unlisted YouTube videos, questions using inaccessible features, but it does, again, check those very, very basic things, like the missing alt text. Just as a comment, you may, when you run this, see some note about something having blank alt text. Note that that is not necessarily an error or a failing. Blank alt text is acceptable as long as the image is purely decorative. In other words, it's just there to look pretty. Like if the question is about a flock of birds flies south for the winter and there's a picture of a flock of birds, right? That doesn't matter. So that picture could have a blank alt text and that would be okay. So if you see that warning, it just means take a look at this and make sure that that's okay. And if it's not, then you got a problem. All right. Then when you go looking at your questions that you have in your assignments, here are some things to look for that could be accessibility problems. One, text or answer boxes that are layered on top of an image. This can be accessible, but a lot of people don't do the extra steps that are necessary to make it accessible. So just be on the lookout for that. Um, Next one is JSX graphs or GeoGebra interactives. Unfortunately, these sorts of things generally can only be interacted with using a mouse, and they have no text alternative. There are now some ways that people can add that accessibility, but again, a lot of people haven't done those extra steps to do that. So just something to be aware of. Third, look for places where color is being used as the only way to identify things. Again, the simplest example is a matching question that has like graphs of different colors and says match each equation with its color without any kind of label or anything on the graph. If there's an additional label, then you're fine. Um, Look out for like non-standard colors where people have like changed the color of the text to be yellow or something, and it might not have sufficient contrast. Um, Look out for cases where an auto-generated text alternative for a graph, which again is usually a table of values, might not be sufficient or useful for answering the question. Now, if you're worried about any of these things, I will note that when you're testing a question in WAMAP, but that's when you click the little preview button in your add remove questions page. There's an option at the very, very bottom that says test with accessibility settings. And if you pick test with accessibility settings, visual and mouse alt, that will show you what the question will look like to someone with those screen readers, with those settings enabled, without you having to go set these settings yourself. Just a quick way to check. Note that some things like static images aren't going to change. You'll still have to go like probably peek in to see if the alt text is set correctly. But at least for some of the other things like the text alternatives on a graph, that gives you a way to see what a student would see. You can see what that table of values would look like, or if the question author overwrote it and put in different alt text, things like that. Okay. Uh, What else? Oh, if you find a problematic question, in other words, if you find a question that is not accessible, I strongly encourage you in that question preview to click the message owner to report problems and let them know what you found. Um, the idea here is if there's a problem with the question, ideally we want it to get fixed for everyone rather than you just fixing it for yourself. Right? I mean, that's the better thing to do. Even if you do fix it for yourself, still report it, because then they can get it fixed for everyone else. Ideally, suggest a fix. Suggest some alt text to use or an alternate caption video. Obviously, your colleagues are busy like you are, so if you can give them a suggestion, it's more likely to get done quickly. Uh, so, try to be helpful if you can. And now, last little sort of topic, a little bit of recommendations for those of you who do write questions, some suggestions when writing questions. First off, use the built-in functions like show plot, histogram as much as possible to create graphs. In particular, try to avoid static images as much as possible. And of course, if you do use any, make sure you add appropriate alt text. Um, if the auto-generated alt text is not going to be appropriate or useful for the question, make sure you use the replace alt text function to replace the alt text with something else. That's a function that allows you to override the automatically generated or default alt text with something of your own choosing. So a good example might be if what you really want students to get out of the graph is it's a polynomial with x-intercepts at these 3 points that passes through this y-intercept, maybe just include that as the alt text rather than making them try to infer that out of a table of values. But again, that's up to you as a question author. It's a pedagogical question, so you can decide how you want to approach that. And of course, don't use color alone to identify things. Add labels to graphs if needed using the add label function. If you're using text on image, make sure you use replace alt text to include all the needed information in the alt text, as none of the layered text will be read. Avoid using text on images with answer boxes if you can. If you absolutely must, make sure you look into the reader label variable, which allows you to define the meaning of each answer box so that someone can figure out what the heck they're supposed to be doing with it. Um, When at all possible, use the required decimals and answer format variables to specify the entry requirements, like it must be a fraction or the number of decimals expected, rather than putting that information in the text. The advantage of this is it associates it with the answer box. So when the student enters into the answer box, it will directly show them that information, or in the case of a screen reader, read them that information. So it's directly associated with the input. If for some reason you do need to put it in text, just make sure you put it before the answer box, because again, a screen reader reads in page order. So if you put enter your answer as a fraction below the answer box, they're not going to see that until they've already answered the question. Let's see. If at all possible, avoid using things like GeoGebra, JSX Graph, and other non-accessible interactives. I know some people really get mad at me for saying this because these things are really cool. Um, right. So if you do want to use them, there's a couple options that you can take to make things accessible. One is there are a couple variables called graph display mode and draw entry mode, which you can use in your question control and question text to like basically rewrite the question if somebody has those accessibility settings enabled. Um, or something else we added this summer, in the question editor at the bottom, there's a box that says use accessible alternative, where you can specify an alternate question ID that addresses the same concept, but in an accessible way. And the idea is that if a student has the accessibility features enabled, so if they have the draw entry or graph entry accessibility settings enabled, WAMAP will deliver them this other question instead of the original question. Basically, they'll swap out the question for them. And that way you can basically have an accessible alternative without having to go crazy coding it into the question. Yeah, that the main question itself. Again, the things you want to be careful on here is making sure that the question is essentially equivalent in concept, since if we're talking about, you know, uh, what's that horrible term? Equivalent but different but equal. I can't remember. But when we're talking about trying to create something that is uh, different but equivalent, we want to really be as equivalent as possible. Oopsie, what did I do? There we are. Oops. Ah, I think that was it. Yep. Okay. A couple last things, some couple helpful resources in the WAMAP training course. There is a accessibility folder, and inside of that, there's a document called Creating Accessible Pages and Questions, which includes a lot of the same information I just told you about. And also in the training course under the question writing folder, for those of you who are question writers, one of the lessons has a couple videos on accessibility considerations for question writing that get into particularly a couple of those more complicated concepts like reader labels and things like that. Okay, that's what I got. And now I get to answer lots of questions, hopefully.
Sweet. Thanks, David. Well, we do have questions. We do have several questions yeah, that I've been following. So
Yes,
can I just dive right in?
please.
So I'm actually going to start with one towards the bottom because, and Leslie, Glenn, if you're still on the call, I might need you to explain your question. It it was asked, I think, during a very specific moment on a specific slide, David.
Okay.
Um, so Leslie asks, is the default decimal places still 3?
Oh, for answer accuracy, um, it is not exactly three. So what it is the default is a relative tolerance of 0.05%. I'm wanting to say somewhere around there. Basically, it ends up working out to about three significant digits. Um, because it's a relative error. So for most number answers that are sort of typical in the range of like 1 to 10, then three decimal places works. But if the number was very large, they could get away with less. If the number is very small, they may need more. Three significant digits or four significant digits is probably the safest. Um, but again, that's an accuracy requirement, which I guess is relevant, but not specifically an accessibility thing.
Thank you. And the question asker said, yay, thumbs up, that answered
Yep.
their question. Another one, does LTI integration, so I think we're talking about Canvas,
Yep.
impact accessibility at all?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Not significantly. Again, there is the option, like I mentioned earlier, a student accessing through Canvas can access those accessibility settings using that three dot more menu in the upper right. They can access their user preferences and set their accessibility options. Um, so I'm not aware of any issue, anything that would really impact accessibility with LTI integration beyond that. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
And I'm curious, the person who asked that question, if you're still on the call, have you experienced any issues or have your students experienced any issues with the LTI integration?
So I actually like LTI integration because in Canvas has certain specific tools where you have the reader, so it translates everything that is text. There's a voice reader that you can automatically use, but I was concerned about whether it measures accessibility accurately. I'm not aware of any deficits.
Thank you. Okay. Um, okay, so let's go back up. So there's several different folks asking a version of the same question. So in the beginning, we talked significantly about the accessibility features that need to be enabled or turned on by students. And so they're wondering, are there written guides or video tutorials geared towards students that they can then, post or hand out in their classrooms to make sure students are aware of those options? And if
Right.
not, is that a consideration? Is that something for consideration?
Yeah, we again, there is on the login page, there's an accessibility link at the bottom of the login page that says accessibility, and it has information on the accessibility settings and recommendations for what to enable. So that's what we currently have. We don't really have a video on the accessibility settings from a student's perspective. If that would be useful, then we certainly could look into making something like that. Uh,
Thanks.
yeah, I mean, generally, yeah,
And we know that, students need different things, so they might decide they need to enable differently than someone else.
right,
But yeah, there are several comments of like basically, how do I make sure my students are aware of these features and that they can turn them on, and are there instructions I can point them to?
right. Um, yeah, yeah, that's interesting because I mean, certainly the I mean, the situation we talk about the most are screen readers, though that's probably not actually one of the most common situations we run into. It's probably a lot of other accessibility needs. One of them being something like issues, difficulty using a mouse, in which case, like that drawing entry would be an important one. Uh, There was a question, could the accessibility be link be on the home page somewhere versus the login page? I suppose it could be. It's either that or maybe it would make sense when, what am I trying to think? Maybe it would make sense on the user preferences page, the page where you actually change the accessibility settings, maybe it would be more useful to have a link there to some information about what the settings do and how, that's how to make it decide which ones you want to use. That's good thought. I will consider that.
Okay. And then I want to take us to there's a question in the Q&A and then a slight conversation in the chat with between David and Elise about supporting MathML. So and I want to echo Elise's comments. So in our first 3 sessions, we actually talked at length about how um, uh, students having access to MathML is one of the most accessible ways to display math equations for specifically a screen reader user who then isn't necessarily relying on alt text, but can actually like get in and navigate all parts of that equation. Um, and then we kind of went into some workflow scenarios around, like how to generate MathML and what products support it. So I think the question that's coming from some folks is, does WAMAP support MathML, or is that on their roadmap?
Well, I don't think that was the question
Was that not the,
necessarily,
okay.
because for what it's worth, MathJax, which we use in WAMAP, does generate MathML automatically from our native format. In other words, there's no reason for a instructor to ever have to type MathML. MathML was never intended for people to write directly.
Right.
Right. So, but yes, MathJax can generate MathML. Um, from what I've read, and this may not be 100% true. I have not been part of the previous sessions, but from what I've been hearing, screen readers are inconsistent with how they process MathML, and they don't always read it the same way, and some of them don't read it well, which is why a lot of some people, I will just say some people, I can't say a lot, some people really recommend like allowing MathJax to generate the speech alternative instead of relying on the screen reader to convert MathML into speech. Because MathJax has sort of built that up in a very standardized way around the MathSpeak standards. So if we're talking about WAMAP, then you don't really need to worry about MathML, I'm just going to say, because again, MathJax can generate it if you want it. There's options in the MathJax settings to turn off its built-in speech generation and generate MathML instead, which then lets the screen reader do whatever it's going to do with MathML. So those options are there if somebody wants to customize how they're hearing the math or what it's being used to process the math. The generating MathML would be a more relevant question if you're generating your own web pages, which I'm going to guess was the more of the context of where that question came from. It looks like or Elise wants to chime in.
I just wanted to apologize. I didn't mean to I
Oh,
didn't
that's
want to
okay.
derail you, David, because I'm like, this is not a question for David because it's not related to WAMAP. But like somebody in the chat in a previous session was like, oh yeah, I use such and such a thing to change my LaTeX code into MathML to put on like Canvas page, right? To
Right.
get and I just was like, what was that? That person might be here. It has nothing to do with you. I didn't mean I didn't mean to derail you.
Is there a need to put MathML in Canvas? I thought Canvas also used MathJax to render its LaTeX
Yeah,
as.
Canvas is now rendering in MathML.
Okay.
So it's native built-in equation editor
Okay.
um is rendering MathML for students.
Okay. Good.
Yeah,
Good. Um,
that is not the case for our Google Suite products, we have learned.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Should I
also
keep? Oh, go ahead.
just as a side comment, if you in WAMAP, if you have math that you've generated in WAMAP using our ASCII math format, and if you ever right click on it, one of the options is show math as MathML code, and it will show you the MathML code, and you can copy and paste it out of there. It's not an equation editor like we're talking about, but it is a way to get MathML if you needed it.
That's great to know. So if folks needed to pull it out for some reason, they can.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. That was a bit off topic.
Oh, let's see. I'm making sure I'm not missing anything in the chat, but I'm going to go back to the Q&A unless there's any hands raised.
There was a chat question
Okay.
from Laura Michaels about accessibility issues in using library packages like for circuits. What library package are you talking about? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there.
So Laura, if you
I
want to,
wrote
if you're
the
here,
question so long ago, I don't remember
sorry.
which one I had to pull in there, but it was a library. I had to, pull in, use library.
Sure.
Activate this.
Was it to generate some kind of graphic?
Calculate solutions to circuits.
Okay. That should be fine. Certainly to calculate solutions. If we're talking about generating graphs, then that's different. If you're talking about circuits in the context of graph theory, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. For a
With
second there, I thought you
graphs.
were talking about electrical circuits.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, most of the graph theory questions automatically generate text alternatives. So any of the graphs that are generated there, the vertices with the edges and everything, if the student turns on the textual alternative, it will generate a adjacency table instead of the graph for those. So it does automatically generate a text alternative.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.
are there plans in the future to add color contrast to the accessibility checker that you built?
Oh, maybe.
Maybe.
I definitely plan on adding it to in the add blocks. You can select colors for the background of blocks, and I do plan on adding an color checker there. The doing a check across all text will be a little bit trickier because, well, for various technical reasons, but hopefully maybe someday. We'll see.
Got it. And then another question from Leslie Glenn. Is this where you might disable the math entry box permanently for your account instead of having to do it for each assessment? I'm not sure I followed that question.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I think what the question being asked is because when you're actually in an assessment, there's a little button at the top which allows you to turn off the math entry or the equation editor. And that only does it for that one assessment. But if you go into or if the student goes into those accessibility settings I was talking about under their user preferences, there is an option for math entry. And if they change that to, or you change that to calculator style text entry, that will change it for all assessments, or will change the default. So no, you do not need to turn it off individually on each assessment. You can, in those accessibility settings, turn it off in general.
Okay. Leslie said that answered that question. Cool. So another person said, I just tried running the accessibility report and I got a bunch of blank alt text notifications. But when I right click inspect on the image, I do see meaningful alt text present. What might be causing this discrepancy?
There is a possibility that the question has extra images in the question code that aren't actually being displayed. It's a weird issue that happened where when people would copy questions and not remove stuff that they didn't use. So that is a possibility. If you can't figure it out, then please message me in WAMAP with the question IDs, and I'm happy to take a look and help you figure out what's going on.
Great. Thank you. That was a good question. Let's see. Another person is asking if there's maybe a way for accessibility features to be enabled by in default setting instead of making users turn it on.
Drink some water.
Oh, hello?
Hmm.
Oh, that person just muted themselves. So,
Sorry,
Okay.
that was me. Sorry. Yeah, no, no question.
okay, that's
Okay.
okay, Maria.
So to that question of could the accessibility settings be enabled by default? No, not the accessibility settings that we were talking about today, because they remove or replace the visual alternative. Like the graph alternative replaces the graphs with a table of values, and you wouldn't want that on by default for everybody. The idea is that, again, as much as possible, we have everything enabled by default. So like MathJax is on by default, though sometimes, again, the older version does require enabling the accessibility. My plan is to switch to the newest version, which does not require that, as soon as it's gone through some testing. It just came out like 2 weeks ago, so I'm being a little hesitant before switching the default over. Um, but yeah, I mean, everything that can be accessible up front is accessible up front. The only things that require changing settings is when somebody needs something that, again, cannot be accommodated through sort of simple automated mechanisms. Like, where something like won't fit as an alt text. And so requires saying, hey, I need this alternative delivered instead. There were a couple questions. There's a question about the accessibility settings when integrated with Canvas. It looks like somebody else already answered the question that, again, the student would, in the assessment, click that three dot icon in the upper right to access their accessibility settings and change the settings there. And just to be clear, once that's changed, that's connected to the account, so they don't have to do that on each assignment. Once they've done it on one assignment, it will be in effect for all the rest of the assignments that they view in the course. So just something they need to do once per account, which in Canvas usually means once per course.
That's great. Someone's asking if you have advice on efficient workflows or ways to check questions that other people wrote for accessibility. Some courses just have so many questions in use.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm afraid. I mean, the hard part is, I mean, I guess sort of my workflow personally would be this. One, run that accessibility scan, which is going to identify that accessibility report, which is going to identify any missing alt text on static images and any uncaptioned videos, and those are the biggest things that you're going to have to worry about. Honestly, every other issue, while there could still be potential accessibility issues, I don't think any of the others are big enough issues that they aren't things that you could just address if they came up. And that may not be a fully politically correct answer, but
Mhm.
again, I think that, if you're talking about, oh shoot, I accidentally put this question in that requires some interaction that I didn't realize required interaction. If a student says, hey, I can't do this question, then you say, oh, shoot, let me figure out how to address that, and you address it. I don't know if that's a legally correct answer. It probably isn't, but um, I mean, yeah. So my tactic, if you wanted to ensure that everything is accessible, here's what I would do. I would focus on questions that involve well, first off, if you know that there's anything interactive in your course, again, anything that uses like a JSX graph or GeoGebra interactive, something that's not using a standard WAMAP feature like the drawing questions or something like that, go look at those because those are the biggest issue. Other things like um, where the where the text alternative for a graph isn't sufficient to answer the question. Is that problematic? Yes. Is it bad for the student? Yes. Does it directly, explicitly violate accessibility standards? No, because there is a text alternative. It's just not a very good one. So it's not good. It needs to be fixed, but I don't think, and again, feel free to shut me up on this, but legally, I don't think there's the same issue there as there is if there is a blatant, like, missing text alternative, or one that was like blatantly bad or useless. But I'm touching into grounds I shouldn't be touching on here. So let me just say, still look for those things, but if you're going to prioritize.
And I think prioritize maybe is the word we latch onto here because um right, we don't want to say that certain content doesn't need to be accessible, but we have this fast approaching deadline. There's a lot of work to be done. There's backlog of work. It's people are looking at an overwhelming amount of remediation. So I think part of what I heard, David, in your response is you prioritize the types of questions that are going to potentially pose the biggest blockers first to students with disabilities. Work through those and identify those, and then the other more minor issues can be worked on, later
Right.
and sort of scaffold their approach. So that's what I'm taking away from this conversation. Do you feel like that's fair?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you. You put that much better than I did. Uh, I mean, I guess some other recommendations would be, of course, if there are multiple instructors at your school using essentially the same material, which tends to be the case with WAMAP. Usually people share courses. Try to get together with those people and coordinate going through your courses. So, divvy things up. Say, hey, I'll go through chapter 1 stuff. You go through chapter 2 stuff, and sort of try to do that. One of the things I did add in WAMAP also is in our promoted courses or promoted courses and template courses, there's now a field for accessibility notes. So if you're sharing a course and you have gone through it and reviewed things for accessibility, note that in the accessibility notes. Just keep in mind that that is not legally binding in any way. So somebody saying I went through it just means that they made their best effort. It doesn't mean that they are claiming that it is necessarily 100% accessible. But it's a way for somebody to say, hey, I've looked at this and at least have given it a glance. So someone else knows that at least another pair of eyes have looked at it as well.
Thank you. I've got a few more questions in the Q&A box, so I'm gonna look at those, and then we probably have time to just open it up to the group as well. Okay, so one person asks, if a question needs to be made accessible, should we notify the original creator? I think you touched on this earlier. Also, are questions marked or tracked in some way once they are accessible? You just talked about the accessibility notes and promoted courses, so there's part of that too. I made
Yeah.
edits to a few questions and selected the option that's allow use for all. So that's the full question.
Yeah. Sorry, the first part of that question again was.
I'll reread it without my
Thanks.
remarks. I
There
will
was
reread it
there was just two
without
two
my
or three things in there, and
yeah,
I missed
I
something.
did a bad job reading the question. Okay. If a question needs to be made accessible, should we notify the original creator?
Yes.
Are questions marked or tracked in some way once they are made accessible?
No, because that would imply some sort of legal claim, and which I am not going to make anyone do.
That makes
And I
sense.
mean, I could put like the accessibility notes. I could put something where somebody could say, "I did my best on this," but nobody should take that as, who's going to trust that if we have a legal obligation to review things, right? Ultimately, because of the way, if we're saying that there's a legal obligation to ensure everything in your course is accessible, then unfortunately that means that you need to review everything yourself.
Yeah. Another question. I just ran the accessibility report in one of my WAMAP classes. There are over 60 uncaptioned videos in the problem section. I checked several of these videos. They are links to YouTube where the user can turn on CC. Are these still considered inaccessible?
Depends. Most of the time when that happens, what's going on is that the video has YouTube generated auto captions, but not manually generated captions. The way you can tell in YouTube is by clicking on that little CC icon. Hold on, I can't remember how to do it now. Let me get to a video so I can remind myself.
Oh yeah, it'll say in a bracket
Yeah.
auto-generated or
So
not.
yeah, if you click the little, actually the easiest way is if you click the little, well, okay, we have a way too, but if you click the little gear icon and click on subtitles, it will say, if it just says off or English auto-generated, then there's only auto-generated captions. If there's a separate entry for English, not with auto-generated after it, that's a manual caption. But you said that there's an easier way?
Oh, when I turn on captioning on a YouTube video
Oh,
and I'm just watching the screen, if it's auto-generated captions, it says that right at the beginning. It says
yes.
auto-generated captions. And if it's manual or professional generated captions, it does not say that
Right.
disclaimer.
Yeah. So that's the biggest thing about that's so when WAMAP checks to see if a video is captioned, it checks to see if there are manual captions on YouTube or not. One other thing to note is that WAMAP cannot check unlisted videos. So if you are including unlisted videos, then WAMAP's going to say, I can't tell if that's captioned or not.
I want to I'm answering a follow-up question about the captioning conversation that I want to voice out loud for the benefit of everyone. So someone asked, like, if we notice that the video is auto captioned, but we've checked it, and the captions are pretty good. They're pretty darn accurate and usable. Are we okay? And my response is probably yes. We because we probably don't have the budget to send out for professional captioning or to have time to manually fix every minute of every video that we're sharing. So if you are taking the time to review the auto-generated captions and it is accurate, then likely that means students are going to get the content they need from those captions. If there are egregious errors, then we need to, remediate that for students who are relying on the caption content.
And it's worth noting that if it happens to be your own video, you can go into the YouTube studio, edit the captions, check to make sure that they're all accurate and hit save, and then that will save them as manually edited captions, and then you're all good. So
Yep.
for your own videos, it's relatively easy to take advantage of those auto-generated captions to quickly caption your videos.
Yep.
Gives you a good start.
Yep. Someone's wondering if maybe you would be willing to screen share and do a little demo for us on this, how to add alt text to an image. So
Sure.
like create a dummy question or pull up a
Yeah,
question.
yeah. Is there a particular context that we're talking about?
The question reads, will David quickly show us how to add alt text to images? Like
Sure.
create a dummy question for us
Sure.
to show how he does that.
Yep. All right, so okay. So the reason I ask context is because there are several different ways to add images, and depending upon how you add them, you would do it in different ways. So if you're writing a question, one way to add an image is down here where it says image file. Am I sharing okay?
Yep.
Make that bigger. Here, if you pick an image file, the way that you add alt text is right here in the description. The description becomes the alt text. So that's the easiest way if you're uploading an image that way. The alternative would be you could use the text editor. And if you're doing content anywhere else, like if you're writing assessment intros or you're writing between question text, things like that, you're probably using this. And so if you want to add an image in here, you would click the little insert image button, you'd upload it. And right here is where it says alternate description. that's where you put the alt text. That is the alternate description or alt text for an image.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
I guess since we're now on the inside and it's, we still have some time, is there anyone out there in the audience that wants David to demo something else? I'm putting you on the spot
I was
again,
going to say
Dave.
I'm totally happy to do whatever. Yeah.
Laura, you've got your hand raised.
I was just kind of curious, thinking about you captioned YouTube videos that might have a graph in them.
Oh, well, I mean, so
Shouldn't have thought of it, right? I don't know.
well, I mean, the captions are for people who can't hear, right? So the issue then would be audio description for somebody who can't see. And what is the status of our requirements around that, Monica?
So the okay, so captions are required per WCAG 2.1 AA for all pre-recorded content. That is not as stringently true for audio description, per my understanding right now. So there are some judgment calls that we can make around our recorded content if something requires audio description. That is more time intensive and more expensive. If there is visual content being displayed in a video that is not auditorily described naturally within the video. So perhaps maybe you're recording yourself, I don't know, drawing something on a whiteboard, and someone to understand what's going on would need to have what you're drawing, described to them if they can't see the image. If that's addressed in the recording, then you might not need additional audio description added to that video. If it's not addressed at all anywhere, in the video's recording or a transcript and whatnot, then someone who is blind and can't see the video recording wouldn't have any way to know what that, graph or image is conveying to them. So then audio description would be necessary for that video to be accessible. So per my current understanding of the requirements, when it comes to audio description, there's a little bit of a decision tree we need to go through to determine if it's required for that video. And that's not true for captions. Captions should be present for all recorded video content, period. And I will can investigate this further, and if I have misspoke, then I will correct myself. That is what I have to share right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, that is a big can of worms.
It is a big can of worms.
All right. If I may, there was a question about how to check alt text for a problem. And so I figured I would show how to do that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So here are a couple questions. For example, here is one that has a graph. Now, this particular one is a automatically generated graph. And so if I was to, I think I mentioned this, if you come down and use the test with accessibility settings option down here, if I say visual and math alt, we see this instead of the image. That's not a very good alt text. And so this is a good example of one that needs some work. Okay, so this question is not using the built-in histogram function. It was using something else, and it's producing something that's not very useful here. That's too bad. Let's look at one other one. Here's one where these look like they are static images. If we switch this one over to visual and mouse alt, you'll notice that we see exactly the same thing. Again, that's going to happen if it's a static image. The easiest way that I have found, there's probably a better one to check alt text, is to right click on it and pick inspect. And that's going to bring up this, which is the um, uh, well, it's the developer console it's called. And if we look down here on their image, notice that it has a blank alt text. It just has alt, not alt equals something useful. And so this image has no alt text at all. And this one would throw an error in the accessibility report because of that. But if it had some other alt text, you would see it here. And if it just said something like alt equals graph, then you would go, oh, that's bad alt text. If it had an actual description, then you would say, great. So in this case, both of these questions are a bit problematic. Let's see if there's one that's not. Nope, that one's going to be problematic. That one's going to be problematic. Well, shoot. I didn't find a good one for here that actually shows the accessibility features working. That's too bad, because none of these questions happen to be using one. Oh well. But yeah, that's how you check. Ooh, ooh, maybe
Thank
this one.
you. Is there a length limit of alt text inside WAMAP? So do you get cut off at a certain
Oh,
point?
good question. If your upload, yes, in certain circumstances, yes, unfortunately. Technically, according to general recommendations, alt text is supposed to be fairly short. Though certainly I know that sometimes that's not possible. The if let's see, if you upload an image to that image file thing, there's probably a limit there. If you upload it through the graph edit inserty thing, there may be a limit there as well. But if you use that replace alt text function, you can make your alt text as long as you want in there, because it's not stored anywhere where it would be restricted. So there are ways to get around that, the restriction if necessary.
And the follow-up question was just answered by another member. Thank you,
Okay.
Elise.
Let's see.
Okay. I have 2 more questions in Q&A, but I also know we're getting kind of active in the chat. So
Yep.
if you're seeing things you want to address, go for it, David.
Let me see. Let's see. Actually, one of these questions you might be able to answer,
Okay.
Monica. Heidi said a bunch of my the report is uncaptioned videos that are hooked to problems that they have no way to edit because they don't own. So
Trying to find that. Oh, okay.
So I will say, Heidi, one option is in WAMAP, in the question settings, you can disable videos. So if you just want to disable the video but still use the question, you can do that without editing the question. That's in the question settings that you can set within add remove questions. Keep in mind you can copy the question and then change out the video if you wanted to, even if it's not your own question. Or of course you could contact the owner of the question and suggest an alternate video to them. And then Monica, I don't know if this would.
I do have some further
yeah.
advice.
Yes, please.
For those videos that you don't own, you can't go in and like fix the captions or upload a corrected caption file, and you don't want to turn it off or remove it like I think David is suggesting. At least I think that's what I heard David say. If it's critical, you need it, you got to use it. Then what I would do is contact one or both of these 2 people at your institution, either your e-learning team or your disability support services team. And they should have a way to help you get that video captioned by like 3Play Media or another third-party vendor. And then it's displayed back in a way that doesn't like violate legal concerns because it's not, content that we own. So there are options available for getting third-party content that we don't own captioned and displayed for your student. Likely you'll need to involve like e-learning or disability support services to help you through that process.
Interesting.
But what I'm saying is like it's a question that I have the video disabled so the students can't access it, but it's
Yeah.
still showing up on the accessibility report.
Oh, well, then you just
Oh,
ignore that warning on the accessibility.
Okay.
I mean, that's just it. The accessibility report is just meant to be informative to help you know where to look for potential issues. If you've
I see, I see.
if you've looked at it and you say, yeah, that's a false flag or that's a incorrect, a false positive, then you just ignore it. Yeah, it's not smart enough
Awesome.
to
That's
realize
way easy. Okay.
it's not smart enough to I didn't make it smart enough to recognize that you had turned off the video. So
No, that's cool. Thank you.
yeah. I mean, there are several things like all those blank alt text warnings. Again, those are just warnings. It doesn't mean that there's necessarily an issue. It just means that it's something you should take a look at to make sure that there's not an issue. Um, yeah. Elijah asked, does the accessibility report allow you to also add alt text as you go, or do you have to hunt down the images to edit them? The accessibility report will have usually a link to the thing causing the problem, where you can then go and, like edit the question or the item where the issue is happening. It doesn't have an editor like built into it, if that's what you're asking.
I have two questions I want to address that are in
Yes,
Q&A,
please.
and then there's another one in chat too that I want to get to.
Yep.
So the first one, it's submitted by an anonymous person who I think is anticipating working with a student in the future, maybe in a math class who is blind and possibly hearing impaired as well. I don't know the student, but I'm making some assumption that the student is probably going to be using some assistive technology to access content on their computer, as well as maybe some sort of interpreter if they also have hearing loss. And the question is it reasonable to make a math class totally accessible to the student without significant use of a specially trained interpreter? Great question. Here's my advice. Over the course of these 4 sessions, we've talked about like the best practices and core foundations of accessible math content. So things that you can check for and do yourself around alternative text, uh, not using PDF, etc. So these are things that we want faculty to be doing in their math and STEM courses, regardless if they're aware of a student with disability or not, because that's our regulation, but it's going to increase accessibility for all. For students with very advanced or specific access needs, like the example in this question, you're going to need to partner with the student and your accommodation office. It's very likely that the student's going to need additional access support and accommodation that goes beyond the proactive accessibility and remediation work that you can do. So if the student needs an interpreter, for example, to attend Zoom class or class with them, that's going to be something that your disability office is going to help you set up. If there's significant alternative format request or remediation that needs to happen tied to a specific student's need, you're going to want to partner with the student and your accommodation office. So the accommodation piece, that relationship isn't going away. That's still part of the faculty's relationship with meeting the need of individual students with disabilities. The pieces that we've talked about in this series and the good work that David's done to make the platform as accessible as possible is to help us be proactive and to make things as accessible as we can, knowing that there might be more significant need tied to a person. And I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure who asked it and if they're still here, but if you want to dive in deeper, we can do that too. David, do you have anything to add there to that conversation?
No.
Okay. And then another person is talking about how they're struggling to come up with their own alternative text for images and kind of knowing how to word things. So I want to just note that question, Dawn, for my co-host here, that I'm hearing the continued need for maybe another session specifically dedicated to writing alt text for stuff.
Writing alt text for
For complex
complex images and graphs can be very challenging,
yeah.
particularly particularly if you're to convey the necessary information that a student needs in order to understand the concept and then also in the context of assessment to give them the necessary information without giving too much away.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult.
Yeah, so the specific question read, I'm still struggling with how to come up with my own alt text for images. For example, if it was a graph of a function, nonlinear, or a parabola or something, how do you word things like that?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, having written 250 alt texts for the pre-calculus book, I mean, I'm by no means an expert, but I've certainly done it a lot. Um, my my approach was always to think to myself, what's important here? What does the student need to know? And what do they not really need to know? Because you don't have to describe every single detail of the graph in your alt text. You need to explain enough that they have the important information. So if the important information is it's a graph of a polynomial that passes through these three roots, then that's all you really need to say, and that is fine. However, unless if you were at the very beginning and you were trying to explain what the idea of a polynomial graph is, then you might need to put more information in order to explain what it means to have a polynomial graph, right? So it sort of depends on the context, how far, what the student already understands and what they don't, right? I mean, you can say it's a parabola with a vertex here and y-intercept here, and for a student who knows what a parabola is, that would be perfectly sufficient. For a student who has no idea what a parabola is, then you're going to need to provide more information.
Zach, who spoke with us session one of the things I've heard him say in different conversations is if you're on the phone with somebody and they couldn't see, they couldn't see the thing, how would you describe it to them? And then taking that a step further to David's point of discerning what is it that you really need them to know and understand from the image, and using the answers to those questions as your guide for writing alt text. David, also you mentioned, depending on the context, like more information than might be needed. And I would say sometimes that means there's an argument for outside of alternative text, more description more description of an image can be in above or below that image. And maybe it doesn't work like that in WAMAP, but there are instances where, you can provide more written contextualized information about something that's not limited to the confines of alt text if that's what you need your students to be able to have.
Right. And I'll mention that I had mentioned before the replace alt text function in WAMAP and for question writers. One of the neat things about that is the way that that particular function works is it will literally replace the alt text, replace the graph with that alt text, at least in some contexts. I would need to make sure it does it in all, but at least for automatic generated graphs, it does, which means you can really put anything you want in there. It is not like alt text, which is limited to a fairly short content. You can put like tables and other sort of richer markup inside of it, which is not allowed inside of standard alt text. It is really meant to be let's replace the graph with something that would be useful for this student, whatever format it might take. I don't know if that made sense, but
Thank you. I think I've gotten through everything. I may have missed something in the chat, so we've got 10 more minutes. Folks, you can feel free to come off mute or raise your hands if I missed something.
So Terry, this was, I think, a while ago that this was asked about the alt text for images. Terry, if you've got an example of a graph, I mean, if we run out of other stuff to talk about, it might be fun to look at one and see what we can come up with. But yes, otherwise, if people have things they want to, anything
Yeah, I'm
else?
not sure if that person's still here, but Yeah, if someone does have an example of something they want to throw up on the screen, we could workshop something together. But I do see an R, I'm not sure, R Tanskly, your hand is raised.
Oh, is that me? Maybe. Yeah, so my question is, I was just kind of doing this while you were talking, and I was looking at like the problem was two similar triangles. And of course there was no alt text to it. But
Sure.
my question is, I could put in, okay, two similar triangles, but each problem generates different numbers. So
Right.
how do you say, okay, yeah, it's two triangles and you're supposed to find, the third side of the triangle, but I can't say, oh, use numbers, 12 and 13 and 15 and 2, because when they go work the problem, it's going to be different numbers. So how do you account for that?
In a question you can put the numbers in the alt text.
Okay.
So what's the question ID? Let's take a look.
Oh, now I got to go back and find it. Um, um, oh boy. Um, I don't remember where it was. I was kind of playing around with a bunch of different problems
Well,
here.
if you find it, go ahead and put it in the chat and we can take a look at
Okay.
it. Otherwise, it
Okay.
looks like we do have another hand up. R Tanksley.
Yeah, I'm not sure of this person's name, but it's RTANKSLEY. Your hand is raised.
Oh, can I just ask a quick question? I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, we're trying to
Uh,
call on you.
Oh yeah, sorry. My supervisor's asked me a question. I'm just getting started. I know I'm late. This is like the fifth one, the last one, but just a quick, I don't want to belabor the point, just to get started. Sorry, or if I can go back to see the sessions or something with WAMAP. I'm just getting started.
Oh, yes. So yes, this has been a four-part series on accessible math and WAMAP with David right now as our last session. But
Yeah.
Dawn and I have a Canvas page with the materials from all the previous sessions, and
Oh,
I
okay.
have actually I'll just grab it right now and put it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
David's stuff
Thanks.
isn't in there yet because it's happening
Oh,
right now, but it will be pretty soon.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do that. And then
All right.
David, you've got like lots of good examples happening in the chat.
Yes. Let's see. Oop. Let's see. Yes. Um, crap. Hold on. Okay. Oh, why isn't that working? Hold on. Sorry, I'm having a hard time pulling up that question that got posted about. There it is. All right, so let's take a look here. Let's take a look together. This will be fun. Okay, so here's the question. We've got triangles are similar, find x, and they are questions where the number changes. So let's take a look at the code for this question to see what's going on. So you see here, this question is using text on image, and I did mention that text on image can sometimes be problematic for accessibility because of that. Do you mind if I change your question? I'm going to guess that they won't. So mind. So here we go. So what I would do here is I would replace the alt text on the image. Currently there is none. I would replace it with enough information to contain to answer the question. And I could do that again by using this replace alt text function. So I say I'm going to redefine the pick to be the pick with, and now I'm going to replace the alt text with something else. And now the trick is figuring out how to phrase the alt text in a useful way. So what we'd probably say is a picture of two similar triangles. The first has base B units. So notice we can go ahead and use those variables in our alt text. so that the numbers will actually show up to that student when they're using alt text. And leg, which is it? I don't know which one it is. I'm going to guess it's this one. Oh, crap. Sorry. And the second has base, this one, and leg X. All right, and when we do that, there's our image. If we say, let's take a look at it with textual alternatives on, then we get that a picture of two similar triangles. The first has base 30, leg 63, second has base 54 and leg X. So we get that replaced alt text with the randomized numbers in there. Yes, there's some crap showing there, but it's hidden from the screen reader, so they won't see that. I need to clean that up, but I haven't gotten around to that yet. But at least we've gotten the alt text in there to provide the same information, or at least useful information, to the person using a screen reader. Were there other questions that came up while I was putzing around?
The chat's getting so active that I am having a hard time keeping up. Abigail put in another image to look at, I think, for alt text conversation.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Some of those, Abigail, like that first image you had with the three cubics and the slope field, that's a great example of where it totally depends on the context in which you are, the question that image came up. Like, depends what the point is, right? I mean, the point might just be an image of a slope field with three solution curves that follow the path of the slopes. Maybe that's all that's important there. Or maybe it's three cubic functions with different vertical shifts that follow the path. I mean, it very much depends on sort of what the point of the question was, at least in my opinion.
I think my concern is teaching differential equations, and just like a lot of the, we've done a lot of work in math to try and get people to understand differential equations graphically via slope fields. Like, we didn't need slope fields. We can still solve differential equations, right? But we've done all this work to create these kinds of different ways of visually seeing them. And so now we have all these questions in our coursework, right? And so it's like, we'll match the slope field to the differential equation.
Right. And that's one where, again, something like, maybe a table of values for the slope field would be sufficient for someone to answer that question. Though, I mean, I understand it's sort of a different thing, but might work. I feel like, well, never mind. I'm not going to go there.
Okay. I apologize, everyone. We might not get to every single comment or question, but we are just about at time. So I want to thank you, David, for agreeing to join us in this series, and for your work on WAMAP and spending this time with us.
Oh, by the way, for the slope field question, there's a macro library in the system called diffyq that has a slope field function, diffyq slope field function, that does automatically generate the table of value alt text, or textual alternatives. So that might be helpful to use if it's not currently using that.
Thank you. I hope folks got that needed to hear it.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot of love in the chat.
That's great. And one final thing, of course, as usual, if you have any questions or need clarification on anything, feel free to ask in the WAMAP support course forums. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions about the accessibility report or other related stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. I will pause our recording now.